Welcome back to the deep dive. We're going deep this time. Yeah. Into how God is portrayed in the Bible, all based on the
Yeah.
research you sent our way. And get this, it's a lot more complicated
Man,
than
yeah.
we might think. We're seeing, that classic line, God is good all the time.
Right.
It's not quite that straightforward. You know what I mean?
Like-
Like we see a God of wrath and vengeance,
Mm-hmm.
but we also see a God of love and mercy. It's almost like we're dealing with two different gods.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
That's a really interesting point. I think
Yep.
it's fascinating how these sort of contrasting portrayals could actually reflect the historical
Yeah.
and the cultural context
Mm-hmm.
in which these texts were written.
Okay, so let's start with the Old Testament.
Okay.
We're seeing some pretty intense stuff here. Plagues,
Yeah.
floods, God commanding entire nations to go to war. This doesn't really line up with that. Love thy neighbor image does it.
Right.
So how do we reconcile these two seemingly opposite sides of God?
Well, I think you have to consider the historical context. Ancient cultures often saw gods as these forces of nature, incredibly powerful entities who, let's just say,
Well,
weren't exactly known for their subtlety.
so God was speaking their language,
Yes,
the language of
it-
power and might.
A language of power and might. And as we move through the Bible, we do see this gradual shift
Yeah.
towards a more merciful portrayal of God.
Right.
And that's where I think the teachings of Jesus really stand out, with their focus on love, forgiveness, compassion.
Okay, so there's a change, but it's not like someone just flipped a switch overnight.
Right.
Right. There must be
You're absolutely right.
more to it.
There's more to it. And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
We need to look at the Council of Nicaea.
Okay.
In 325 AD, this council played a huge role in shaping how we understand God today. Their goal was to solidify Christian doctrine, things like the nature of Christ, and which scriptures would be considered the official word.
So they were kind of like the editors of the Bible.
You could say that. Certain texts, especially those that emphasized a wrathful God, were downplayed or even left out entirely, while the texts that focused on love and mercy were given a much bigger platform.
Wow, that's a pretty big deal. So the God that most people know today, the one who's all about love and forgiveness, is partly a product of decisions made
Yeah.
by this council
What?
centuries ago. That's crazy.
And we can't ignore the political context of the time either. Emperor Constantine, who called the Council of Nicaea, was really focused on uniting the Roman Empire under a single, universally accepted religion.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. A God focused on love and forgiveness probably seemed a lot less threatening and a lot more unifying.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Than a God who's constantly dishing out punishments.
Mm.
This less fire and brimstone version of God might have been seen as more in line with the kind of social order Constantine was trying to establish.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of what we believe about God
Yeah.
is actually shaped by historical and political forces that we might not
That's a fantastic analogy.
even realize.
It's like we're looking at God through a lens that's been colored by history.
Yeah.
It's not that God's character changed. It's more about the way people were choosing to see God, the aspects they chose to emphasize.
But if we only focus on God's loving side, do we risk overlooking some of the other important aspects of God's nature,
Yeah, that's an important consideration.
like justice, holiness, and yes, even wrath?
It's a bit like saying
Are we
someone is only kind
painting just a partial picture?
and never holds anyone accountable for wrongdoing. It's not really a balanced view of any person, is it?
Right. Even Jesus, who preached love and forgiveness,
But-
wasn't afraid
Exactly.
to call out hypocrisy and sin. He wasn't just a pushover.
To truly understand the God presented in the Bible, we need to wrestle with the full spectrum of God's attributes, the good and the, let's say, challenging aspects.
It's not about
It's not about cherry picking
gory,
those Old Testament stories.
but trying to make sense of it all as a whole.
We need to engage
Yeah.
with them too. Absolutely. Engaging with the full range of early Christian texts can help us see how theological ideas have developed over time, especially from the Council of Nicaea onwards, and how those developments have shaped our current understanding of God.
So we need to see the whole picture, warts and all.
Picture
Understand God as a complete being, not just an idealized version.
And this brings us to another fascinating layer that we need to explore. And this brings us to another fascinating layer that we haven't touched on yet,
Okay.
and it might surprise you.
I'm all ears.
It's the idea of many gods.
Hold on a minute. I thought we were talking about monotheism, the belief in one God. Now we're bringing in multiple deities.
Let's not.
Sure.
Quite as simple as it seems. When you look closely
Okay.
at the historical and cultural context,
Yeah.
you start to see this interesting tension between the idea of one God and the idea of many divine beings.
Okay.
You have to remember
Yeah.
that ancient cultures often had entire pantheons of gods,
Right.
with each god representing
Yeah.
different aspects of life or nature.
Like the Greek gods, right? Zeus, Hera, and all, right?
Yeah, exactly. So how does that fit in with what we see in the Bible? Even in the Old Testament, there are mentions of other gods. Now, it's not presented as polytheism, the belief in many equal gods. Instead, it's more like an acknowledgement that other nations worshipped different deities. The Israelites were told to worship only Yahweh, the one true God. But the existence of other gods wasn't outright denied.
So it was more like, yeah, those other gods might be out there.
That's a great way to put it, but they're nothing compared to Yahweh. Early Judaism might have been more henotheistic, which means they believed in one supreme God, while acknowledging the existence of other, less powerful gods. It represents a fascinating stage in the development of religious thought.
So they were gradually moving from a more fluid idea of the divine with multiple beings towards the stricter monotheism
Exactly.
that we see later on.
And even as the focus on monotheism grew stronger, those hints of other spiritual beings never completely disappeared. In the New Testament, Paul even mentions so-called gods and many lords. He was acknowledging the presence of these other spiritual forces, while still emphasizing that there's only one true God.
So it's like they were saying, like, there might be other players in this cosmic game.
That's a great analogy,
Huh.
but we're only on Team Yahweh. And this idea of a multi-layered spiritual reality became even more prominent in some early Christian mystical traditions,
Yeah.
like Gnosticism.
Gnosticism, that's a whole other deep dive right
Well-
there. What is that?
Gnosticism was a movement in early Christianity that had a very different take on the divine.
Okay.
They believed in a whole hierarchy of spiritual beings, starting with a supreme, unknowable God, and then descending through various levels of divine emanations or beings, all the way down to the material world.
So for them, the spiritual realm was like a ladder with different levels of spiritual beings.
Precisely. And they believed that humans, through special knowledge or gnosis,
Yeah.
could ascend this ladder and achieve spiritual enlightenment.
So they had a very different understanding of God and the spiritual world.
Yes, absolutely. Compared to what became mainstream Christianity, Gnosticism was ultimately rejected by the early church, but its ideas continued to influence mystical and esoteric traditions.
So getting back to the Bible, are we saying that it isn't entirely against the idea of there being many gods?
It's more nuanced than a simple yes or no. The Bible isn't advocating for polytheism, but it does seem to reflect the fact that people in the ancient world had a more complex understanding of the divine realm than just a single God. It's like they were trying to grasp this vast, mysterious spiritual universe and make sense of their place in it.
So it wasn't as straightforward as one god versus many gods. It was a gradual evolution of thought.
Exactly. A refinement of their understanding of the divine. Well, some fascinating detours along the way.
And when we explore these different perspectives, we start to get a richer sense of how the concept of God developed over time and how it was influenced by the surrounding cultures and beliefs.
Like peeling back the layers of history and seeing how the idea of God has been shaped and reshaped through the centuries.
And even with the move towards monotheism, the concept of other spiritual forces remained, just in a more subtle way.
And what's really fascinating is that maybe the idea of many gods wasn't so much about the existence of multiple competing deities. Instead, it was a way of acknowledging the incredible vastness and complexity of the spiritual realm, something that ancient cultures were keenly aware of.
So maybe they weren't thinking about separate gods in the way we might picture it today, but
Right.
more about the idea that the spiritual realm is multifaceted with different levels or layers of reality.
And it might include things like angels, demons, or other spiritual beings that we find mentioned throughout the Bible. It's about recognizing that our spiritual reality might be far richer and more intricate than we often imagine.
Yeah. It's like saying the spiritual world isn't a simple two-player game, but a vast and intricate tapestry with countless threads and colors.
I like that. And understanding this complexity can give us a much deeper appreciation for the spiritual journeys of those who came before us as they grappled with these big questions and tried to make sense of their place in the universe.
It reminds us that we're not just passive observers in this grand cosmic drama. We're active participants, and the choices we make matter.
Precisely. And that brings us to a crucial question. What does all this mean for us today? How can we apply these insights to our own understanding of God and the spiritual realm?
It seems like we're being encouraged to approach our own faith and spirituality with a sense of curiosity and openness. Maybe it's less about trying to fit God into a neat little box, and more about embracing the mystery and the vastness of the divine.
I think that's a wonderful way to put it. We don't have to have all the answers. In fact, maybe the journey of faith is about embracing the questions and allowing ourselves to be transformed by them.
Okay, so it's about saying, okay, we might not have it all figured out, but that's okay. Let's keep exploring. Let's keep asking those tough questions. Let's keep digging deeper.
Absolutely. And that exploration might lead us to a much deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe. We're invited to follow in the footsteps of those ancient seekers who wrestled with these profound questions, and in doing so discovered something truly remarkable about the nature of reality and their own place within it.
It reminds me of how Jacob wrestled with the angel in the Old Testament. It wasn't a passive experience. It was a struggle, a confrontation that ultimately led to a blessing and a deeper understanding of who he was.
That's such a powerful image. It highlights the active nature of faith, the idea that we're not just meant to sit back and passively receive information, but to actively engage with our beliefs, to wrestle with them, to question them, and to allow ourselves to be challenged and transformed by them.
It's about recognizing that our journey of faith is lifelong, a continuous process of learning and growing, of deepening our understanding and our relationship with the divine.
Beautifully said. And I think that's ultimately what this deep dive has been all about. It's about encouraging you to question, to explore, and to approach your own spiritual journey with a sense of wonder, curiosity, and an open mind.
So, as we wrap up our exploration of how God is portrayed in the Bible, I want to leave you with this. What if the idea of many gods wasn't about multiple deities battling for supremacy, but rather about acknowledging the incredible vastness and complexity of the spiritual realm? It was something that ancient cultures grappled with, and maybe it's something we should be open to exploring as well. Who knows what insights we might find when we dare to step outside our preconceived notions and embrace the mystery.
What a powerful thought to end on. It's a reminder that our understanding of God and the spiritual realm is constantly evolving. It's shaped by our personal experiences, by our cultural influences, and by our willingness to keep exploring and questioning. And who knows, maybe by embracing that open-minded questioning approach, we'll discover something truly profound about ourselves and our connection to the divine.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new perspectives and sparked your curiosity about the spiritual realm. Keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep the conversation going. Until next time.